Good afternoon. Sean and I are super excited to talk a little bit about future-proofing today and how you can prepare your healthcare website with a semantic data layer. Now, if you don't know what that is, don't worry. We're going to cover all of that today. And we're going to start by introducing you to the concept of a knowledge graph. So this is my knowledge graph. It's who I am and how I'm connected to other things in the world. You can see I'm Canadian. I attended MIT, and I have a background in engineering, so we'll talk a little technical today, and feel free to ask us technical questions. I am Canadian, and I'm the CEO and co-founder at Schema App. But I also grew up in enterprise. So I spent 14 years at Cisco, where I learned a lot of the challenges of being agile, as well as being innovative. And a lot of what I learned there is what I introduced and what we try to solve at Schema App. I know a thing or two about schema markup, and I'll share some of that knowledge today. And I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. And so this is a picture of my red car that I used to bomb down the streets of Toronto. And my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase that Kevin Bacon directed. And so Kevin Bacon used to drive my car. This is awesome, right? So just like machines infer things from your structured data, you have inferred from my structured data that you can win the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game. And so we'll explain today how you can use that structured data on your websites. But first, let me hand it over to Sean to introduce himself.
Okay, so I don't think I have something as cool as Martha in the car, but I'll try, all right? So I'm an alumni of your college of Pennsylvania, also at Johns Hopkins University. While there, I worked at Jacobs Engineering, and I was a ballistic photographer there. I built out some digital asset management systems for the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army there. I took that knowledge with me over to Johns Hopkins Medicine, where I am today as their digital asset manager. I wear another hat as an SEO person, focusing in on the technical SEO. And again, I tried to be as cool as Martha in the car, but that's pretty tough to beat.
So we're going to just start by making sure we're all on the same page. What is schema markup? I like to think of schema markup as the language of search engines and now AI. And schema markup's not new. It's been around since 2011. It was created by Google, Yahoo, and Bing. And it is also sometimes known as structured data or schema markup. We'll use those interchangeably in today's presentation. People historically knew it for rich results, but now it's playing more and more of a role in making sure that you're understood by machines. It shows up like this. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you a ton of structured data in JSON-LD today. But you can see here we're explaining Johns Hopkins. We're explaining who they are as an organization and how you get a hold of them and how they connect. So it really is data that sits on your website that helps with understanding. Historically, and it still today, drives rich results. And this is how most people know about schema markup. And rich results are still working very, very well. So in a world of 0 clicks, we're still seeing higher click-through rate when you achieve a rich result. And so if you can get that content on your site, if you have reviews and ratings for your physicians, it's a great strategy and it's delivering results. So let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about how the market's changing. Sean.
Yeah, so the market update. We know that the landscape has changed dramatically as we look at our analytics. This is not our direct analytics, but this is just a wide, looking at the World Wide Web and its analytics here. And the landscape itself is Google is dominating it, but ChatGPT is gaining the attention there with other AI systems as well. And so what does that mean for us? So it means that we're now not optimizing just for search engines, but we're also optimizing for AI agents that can read and reason and also react to our content too as well. So this image here is just data that reinforces that shows that while AI assistants are growing, Google remains that main entry point to web traffic. And that's why the structured data needs to work in both environments. And that's traditional search as well as AI-powered discovery.
When I look at this, it's like got to keep doing what we're doing in SEO for Google, and we need to start planning and taking actions for what's happening in AI. Because it's like happening, but it's not happening like right this second.
Right.
So in May, we started seeing news come out from Google and Microsoft that started talking about structured data in new ways. In fact, Google started by saying, you need to add structured data because it helps us with our AI experiences. They were sort of generic in sort of which AI experiences, but they at least put it in their documentation and said that it needed to get done. That same week of May 19th, Microsoft also made an announcement reiterating the importance of structured data. Now, I live and breathe in this world, and they really haven't talked about this in a recurring way pretty much as far back as like 2023. So something has changed. Now, most recently, on October 23rd, so just a couple weeks ago, at Google Search Live in Dubai, Google then said, not only is structured data important, but it's critical to their new AI features. And then they added this second sentence where they talked about structured data being efficient and that AI systems liked it too. And while this was my hypothesis as to why back in May they started talking about it, that it was more cost effective, frankly, for them to do inferencing and understanding, they've become more explicit about it in recent announcements such as this one. Now, Microsoft also has been being very vocal, and in a publication that they did earlier this fall, they talked about how to prepare for your AI systems. Now, what was interesting is the gentleman who wrote the article also presented in September at Brighton SEO, and he not just talked about AI, but he also added how to prepare for agents. Now, what's really exciting for all of you is that he actually gives us a checklist. What are the things that we can actually do in order to prepare for AI? And I love this because whether you're a content writer or an SEO, it's really going back to basics. It's talking about adding structure in headings, title tags, right? Like this isn't rocket science, right? It's talking about avoiding long walls of text and PDFs and hiding information under a click. Again, basic technical SEO, right? It also has, I love, make sure content has depth, right? So authority is going to play a more important role as we move into this AI and agentic space. And then, of course, my favorite, implement schema markup. Now, there's research also I'll be sharing today that talks about sort of, well, what are we seeing? Why is structured data showing up again and again from Google and Microsoft, but how are we seeing it work in the wild? And so this article came out and this research came out in September saying that when you do high quality structured data, good news, that's what we're gonna share today, you'll actually see it have an impact on AIO visibility. AIO visibility, as you know, is measured through SEMrush, through BrightEdge, through other tools, but it really is showing up in Google in that sort of AI overviews answer. And so if you do good quality schema markup, we are seeing it result in that higher visibility. So what does high quality schema markup look like? And so Sean and I are going to endeavor to give you some tips of things that you can look at, a checklist of sorts, so that you can verify if you're doing high quality structured data today or how you start on that journey to prepare for AI. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about agents. So the first thing is around definition. And this is one of my favorites because, AI is answering complex questions for us today. And so if you're doing schema markup and you're using the validator to kind of see what's on there, and if you don't know what that is, come find me afterwards, I'll show you what that looks like. If you're just talking about the page as a web page, it's not specific enough. And so schema.org is this vocabulary that has a ton of detail. So maybe content writers in the room, any content people in the room, schema.org is a great resource for you to say, what are the machines wanting to know about a certain topic? And then those of you that are SEOs in the room, you can use that as a guideline to say, how do I then use schema markup to explain what all those things are? And so, we want to make sure that we're being as specific as possible. I always talk about in schema markup, it's like being a philosopher, right? What is this page about? You get to ask that big, broad question and then be really specific, right? If the page is talking too generally about things, that's kind of going back to that AI recommendation by Microsoft saying, no, it has to be authoritative and deep, right? So that's the first step in kind of high quality is using those definitions. And in the healthcare space, there's so many cool ones, right? Medical condition, drug, physician, hospital, you can be really, really specific. Okay, so once we've picked it up, what's the next step, Sean?
Well, the next step is the depth. So we have our schema types, but within our schema types, we have what they call properties. And those properties really help to define that type and bring that piece of content depth. And so this depth helps AI systems understand the context of the relationships that are there. And that's not just understanding just the keywords out on the page. So you're really defining what those things are that are part of the page. And so this next page here we have is within schema.org. It is a physician type. And the listing down there are all the properties that can describe that physician. And so those are the properties that we want to look at on our page, our physician page, and start to build out and really expand on that depthness. And this is a view of our physician page here, and you can kind of see the different areas of what we are pulling out. We're defining properties like specialty. We're defining properties of language and affiliations. And we provide this structured context that both search engines and AI systems can trust. Yeah, back over to you for breath.
All right, so now that you've been really specific on describing what the page is about and everything you can do, and I love the example Sean just shared, like it includes like a potential action. So that's gonna be really important when we get to agents, right? When agents are taking actions, go book me that appointment. It's going to need to be able to know sort of where it's gonna go do that action. Breadth is new. Historically, we would say optimize for rich results and optimize for those key marketing conversion pages. But it's interesting, we're in a new context now. With AI has to understand all the different connections, like all the different contexts of the business. You know, that could be, you know, not just like support questions or questions of where do I park at a hospital, but all the way to like really specifics about sort of, you know, something specific that maybe a doctor specializes in or treats. And so now we're saying you have to optimize the whole website so that that entire context, that whole story is there. And when you connect those different pages, you know, that's when it becomes more meaningful. So I want to go back to my Kevin Bacon story, right? The reason you were able to do that inferencing is because you defined the relationship between Me, My Car, the movie, and Kevin Bacon. So let's think about what that would look like on your website. And so I want you to think here about, you know, like the middle is your physician page. You know, you have medical procedures. You maybe have a landing page talking about robotic surgery, or maybe it's like a cardiac surgery or a bariatric surgery. You have a specialty, a hospital, and then your medical organization is your homepage. And so just like I made connections with Kevin Bacon, you're gonna use schema markup in order to define those relationships. And when you define these relationships, all of a sudden you can answer way more complicated questions. So if I'm, you know, having a conversation with ChatGPT, I may be looking for, you know, a female doctor who treats Lyme disease, who happens to work at a clinic or a hospital within 5 miles of my house. I want to know if they take my insurance. I want to know where they went to university or perhaps where they did their residency, because I'm researching something that's really important to me. And so it's not just what's on that physician page. It's the entire health system story that's going to make that meaningful connection and allow me and allow the machine to do that inferencing that's going to connect me with the right doctor. Does that make sense? Remember Kevin Bacon. And so this concept of connecting actually then brings us into what's a new area of SEO called entity SEO. Maybe hands up if you've heard of entity SEO and entities. Okay, so entities, think of it just as a thing. And the best way to describe this, I think, is like, I'll use this example on, you know, it's sort of like, if I were to describe, I have a shoe, and I really love this shoe. I wear this shoe like all the time. But then if I told you that the shoe was hot pink, sparkly, and high-heeled, you would have a very different picture of what that shoe looks like. And so the same thing goes with entities. If you're just saying, oh, it's a doctor, but then you actually start adding all these properties, so this is actually what Sean was describing earlier, and say, well, this person's a specialist. They've been doing this surgery for 25 years. They went to the prestigious school where they're known for doing this advanced training. They work at this, you know, this location, and this location actually does, you know, X amount of surgeries on a weekly basis or a daily basis. All of a sudden, you have way more context. And so entities are about describing things fully, but they're also about describing it with clarity. So in this example, it's I love Apple. Well, do I like apples, like to eat, or apples, the company? And so schema markup can actually help you clearly define what entity you're meaning to talk about. And that's where I'll hand it back over to Sean, because schema markup is that language to describe these entities. And these entities are the things that the machines are going to sort of associate with the different, almost like topics on your site. Oh, sorry, I'm going to do a couple more things before we do it. So entity linking is when we start building these connections in context. And there's two different kinds. There's internal and external, but it really is bringing this context. And so, when you think of like context is what allows that inferencing. And there's a couple different benefits from doing this. The first is everything is well connected, and therefore it's like one cohesive knowledge graph or data layer. And the second is that it's going to make it accurate, so it's going to be better understood. Okay, now over to you, Sean, to explain the different types of entity linking.
Yeah, so external entity linking. This is where we connect to other entities outside of your website that are authoritative. And so like we up here are linking to neurology. Like Johns Hopkins does not own the entity neurology. But we know that AI systems, we know that Google and a lot of them have trust in other sources out there. So we're linking out to those sources through schema markup. And this just adds external validation and strengths for those AI systems to really trust and bring that accuracy to the page itself. And now we have internal linking. So internal linking does the same thing, but within your own site. So for example, if you're going to link a physician to their department, to a clinic or to a specialty, these internal connections help define your organization's unique knowledge graph.
And so good news. If you do this more advanced type of schema markup where we're connecting all the dots, so we're either bringing clarity through that external linking or we're bringing context through internal linking, it actually drives 3 times higher visibility in AI overviews. And we're seeing this across our client base as we sort of, don't just do basic schema markup, but we then take it to the next level, adding this sort of next, I'll call it disambiguation or this new clarity, that we're actually seeing AIO performance increase. It also builds a really healthy knowledge graph, which is really important for the future of where this is all going. So these are the 4 things to check. Are you describing things properly with the definition? Are you using as many properties as possible to define all that amazing content on your site? Are you covering the site? And then are you doing this more advanced piece, which is connecting entities and bringing clarity through entity linking? When you do this, you build a knowledge graph. And historically, this may not have been important for SEO, but now that we live in this world of AI and agents, it's really, really strategic. And so I like to define content knowledge graph. So I introduced myself with my knowledge graph, but a content knowledge graph is where you're defining relationships using a consistent vocabulary. And that consistent vocabulary is schema.org, right? So the vocabulary that they've been using for search for over a decade. And when you do this, you enable inferencing. And so I love this image. Like, Martha, what does a knowledge graph look like for a website? You can see it's all these connected dots. And I always like to think of this as when you're asking that really detailed query that I need a female doctor who knows Lyme disease, who works at a clinic. I'm kind of crawling the graph, right? The bot is crawling the graph, trying to understand all that context in order to answer the question. And so let me talk about how this is going to change in this next chapter that is just unfolding. Because inferencing is absolutely at the center of the future of search and the future of AI. In fact, if we look at Gartner's report on sort of the AI hype cycle, this is sort of what tech and what things were really, really big sort of in this first cycle, so since late 2023 until now. The next hype cycle names knowledge graph technology as a key element of what's going to kind of enable AI to scale. So you might ask why. Well, knowledge graph technology, or also known as semantic technology, isn't new. It's been around for a long time. And there's a breadth of research that shows that accuracy of large language models increases when it has a knowledge graph or structured data in order to reference. So whether that be reducing hallucinations or being able to be more efficient, I love it sort of when you think of even the sustainability angle, right? How do we make sure the machines are being as efficient as possible with the most accurate answers? Knowledge graphs are at the center of it. And so schema markup, again, an SEO tactic, is now a strategy for your health system to prepare for AI.
Yeah, and this is the key takeaway here. I mean, schema markup is the bridge between your brand and AI understanding. And it ensures that the search engines and AI assistants and the other digital systems that are in your ecosystem can really trust the information accurately. And so we go down here, here's just a case study here. We had a physician who was wondering why he was not showing up as head of neurosurgery or head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. Rightfully so, because he is. But in this query we were having on the right-hand side here, we had one of our physicians who was showing up, who was also head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, but at our all-children's location. And so by defining these entities and linking them internally and externally, and building a connected semantic foundation, we were able to have a better result, with AI comprehension, and a richer result that improved visibility overall. And you can kind of see now that both physicians, the one up in Baltimore, as well as our physician down in All Children's, is showing up there with complete information and with accuracy.
Yeah, we're seeing this across different pieces. When it's getting the answer wrong, the structured data can help kind of direct the AI to get that right answer. And so before I talk about agents, I want to just do one more summary of how we think about the value of schema markup. And it's what we call our value house. So most people start at the bottom in the foundation of just optimizing a page. But as Sean shared with our internal and external entity linking, you can raise that to a content knowledge graph, which then unlocks all kinds of additional value for your organization. So you'll still get SEO-rich results, you'll still get higher click-through rate and visibility in AIO, but you'll also then start to understand kind of what entities or what topics you're actually an authority on and that your content's reflecting, which will help content marketers in the room be able to make sure you're writing the right content to show up for the right topics. And then the last piece, which is probably what gets me most excited these days, is where you can reuse it as a data layer to accelerate your internal AI initiatives, because they can use that data in order to help your inline chat, or maybe it's your on-site search or your internal search, but also now for agents. And so the last piece of this presentation, I'm going to share what we've heard and learned in the last 60 days with regards to how structured data is actually going to be at the foundation of preparing for agents. And so I love this article. It's back from 2001. And you may be familiar with Tim Berners-Lee, Ora Alasla, and then also James Hedler. And they talked about the semantic web. And the semantic web, actually, I love this article because the healthcare example in it is so good. So I do encourage you to go back and read this, and I'm happy to share the link. But they basically talk about the semantic web as where machines fully understand everything on the web so that they can then prepare to take action. And so now when we talk about the agentic web, it's about those actions. It's about sort of being able to book that appointment, find the right doctor for me, pull together the research that I need to know, maybe from work that's being done at Johns Hopkins, in order to help me be a more educated patient. And the agentic web is happening now. It's not just a future thing. And the example I like to use is just what we're seeing come out of OpenAI, where they're working with Stripe and other partners so that you don't leave the browser to do transactions. Now, this is starting with e-commerce, right, which is baby steps for us as consumers. But I guarantee as soon as this starts happening for things like buying my favorite protein powder or maybe my Christmas presents, the next thing I'm going to want to do is use it for my finances and healthcare. And what's really interesting is OpenAI is also now trying to own that whole experience. So 2 weeks ago, they announced Atlas. Atlas is their new browser. So now they're not just going against Google with regards to search, but they're going against to try to own the entire browser experience. So we'll see sort of how else this explores. Perplexity also brought out their browser. Bing still has their browser, Microsoft. But again, it's all about control and data and staying within the transaction. So the last thing I want to share is about NLWeb. So NLWeb is a project coming from Microsoft. It was announced that same week in May when Google and Microsoft started talking about structured data again. And NLWeb is really something that allows an open language interface on your website. And eventually, they're talking about making it your agentic endpoint. Now, I had the privilege of getting on the phone with Microsoft's CTO office because they reached out to us because we have the most structured data in the world for enterprises to talk about their vision and what they're trying to do. Structured data is what they're going to use to inform this agentic endpoint in order to prepare your website. And so now, it's not just about visibility in search, but about preparing your data on your website for this next thing that's happening. And it's happening now. So I'm happy to share that we'll be writing about using NL Web. It's actually on the Schema app website now, so if you want to go experience it. And then we'll be writing as much as we can to kind of educate people about how this is changing and how we see it adopting and rolling out for the enterprise. So Schema Markup's more than just SEO. It unlocks a knowledge graph that allows inferencing to solve and add clarity to machines, as well as sort of unlock value in your organization. So the last thing we thought we'd just talk about is measuring AI search, because we're actually operating in what I like to call a dark funnel. ChatGPT and all these new AI platforms are not providing data. And I am not popular, but I'll say the tools out there that say that they can report on brand visibility in ChatGPT, the prompts are made up. They're not actually real data prompts. And so I thought it'd be great for me to share, I like just sticking with the things that are real that we can measure today. Google's still the behemoth, right? To kind of circle back to Sean's first call. So it's still about clicks and impressions and click-through rate. And then it's about traffic and conversions. So the things that we can truly measure are, I would say, stay grounded on those. Now, Sean, what are you measuring in addition to those?
Well, we're looking at this in the same fashion. We have these same results, and we're just looking at what's coming in with the referrals. We're looking at the clicks, looking at the impressions, the traditional stuff. I mean, we don't chase volatility. We just have to double down on what we know and just kind of move through there until more of this information comes about and we can really understand it.
Amazing. Measure what we know, right? Conversions is sort of key. So that's all we've prepared for you today. Sean and I are around all today and tomorrow, so feel free to kind of find us, ask questions. My team did put together a resource that you can download off of here. We also have a booth, so if you want to come have a conversation, learn more, we're happy to share all of our knowledge and point you to other resources that you can use if you want to educate your team about this. Thanks, and have a great day. Oh, we have questions. All right, we have questions. We have one at the back.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Is there a coffee in the back?
Yes, there is a coffee. Michael's got coffee. All right, question at the back.
Two questions. Epic EHR. I couldn't find any stuff on our deployment for Schema and how they're deploying that or implementing within their ecosystem. Do you have any information on that?
I have been told, yeah. Do I have still my car? No. The day my second child was born, I felt it not really responsible for me to have a car with no seatbelts. So I did sell the car on that day. It was an epic day, right? Epic day, that's funny. I sold my car and I gave birth to my son. But I look forward to getting a bug-eyed Sprite as my next one. They have a bigger engine. So Epic has released Schema Markup for their physician profiles. But when you think back to sort of here, they're kind of operating on this bottom level, because they're just optimizing the physician and not connecting it to anything else. And so when we think about sort of the importance of structured data, it's not just optimizing a page, it's bringing that relationship and context, right? Because you can't do that inferencing if you're not connecting the dots. So that's what we do at Schema App, that's what we do at Scale. But it's that's sort of the difference and something you can ask when you're talking to different vendors about it.
Can I add on to that?
Sure.
Yeah, so when you're looking at your physician pages and where they're coming from too as well, so the language and what it's in also kind of matters a little bit. So a preferred language there is the JSON LD, so sometimes you'll have item scope or something along those. Not that it's horrible or bad, it's just there's a preferred method out there, and we want to make sure that that is what the signal that we're sending to Google.
Yeah, microdata is sort of the old way of doing it. JSON LD, Google's been preferring JSON LD for almost a decade now. Question in the front here.
So the external linking, does it matter what website you use?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so he was asking about external linking. Does it matter what website you link to? Yes, it's really important that your organization believes that's the truthful kind of definition of things. So Google's knowledge graph is a really great one. Wikidata is sort of Wikipedia, but sort of without a language. Now, some health systems I've talked to don't like Wikidata or Wikipedia. They want to sort of go to maybe a medical journal. And so Schema App actually allows you to define which one you want to use and how you define things, because it's important for that the organization's comfortable with those definitions. But Google's Knowledge Graph is the most common one.
And so, so you have a provider, if they're like a OBGYN, I would want to define
OBGYN, yeah.
what is OBGYN?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, so OBGYN would be one of those external entities that you could say, we want to be really clear what this means. We found when we do entity linking with OBGYN is it's often referred to in many different words on your website. Some places it's called maternity, sometimes it's obstetrics, sometimes it's OBGYN. So that's a really great one where in the sort of the advanced use cases, we'll also do synonyms. So we can then say like, this is one entity and it's all of these things refined to it. Yep. Yep, in a more kind of advanced use case. Yes?
Does entity linking help solve the issue of, the question I get a lot are, we have multiple domains for our health system.
Yes.
There's .org, so that helps rather than, or would you say you should look at everything?
Okay, the question is like, does entity linking help connect the dots between different websites? And the answer is yes, right? So I think it's like one of those things where, again, you're defining the relationships between things. So it might be, well, this hospital system's parent organization is this organization. Or it might be that like in future, like I really think that you're not gonna need to define like a certain type of medical service, like unless it's uniquely done at that location. For your system, there might be just one. So it's like, oh, these are our physicians and this is like the clinic and it does this service, and to define that service, go to the primary landing page for our organization that defines that. And so it really kind of gets you thinking about that content map, because again, the machines are smart, right? They don't need it to be repeated. They just need to understand the context of what that relationship is. Yeah, so I think I won't say it solves for it, but I think like it plays a role in sort of being more deterministic. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, the gentleman next to you.
Does doing entity linking, does that require, I guess, building that knowledge graph? Is that something you could build within your CMS, or is that like a separate relational database that sits outside of it?
Okay, good question. So let's talk about relationship database versus a knowledge graph. So this is sort of, everyone ready? This is like what blew my mind when I first learned about this. So if you're thinking of a SQL database, for example, like it has columns, right? And it's like one data entry, and if you want to add like new complexity or additions, you have to add another column, and that can be really arduous because then you have to fill out the data for everything, like that relates to that. In the knowledge graph world, so you actually define everything in a triple. So you're just defining the relationship. And the example I typically use is like, Martha is a woman can have a baby. And then those are 3 triples, right? And then you can infer that Martha can have a baby because she's a woman, right? Like, so that's how it like crawls. So there's only triples in knowledge graphs. And so semantic technology companies will know how to do that. Again, that's like what we do. You can start by doing the basics. Like sometimes in your CMS, it'll allow you to kind of optimize a page, but then you've got to get really good at making sure it's the IT team's like getting dynamic and defining it. It's really hard, and most people don't do it well. That's why I have a business, right? Like, yeah. It's just like there's not a lot of people who are thinking about it in the semantic technology realm. They're still thinking about it in this old world, and it's not dynamic or agile enough. Yeah. Yes, at the back.
So you were talking earlier about the sort of structure of the way the different objects or entities are related to each other. But the content itself, like has schema gotten to the place where it's like this medical specialty does these procedures? Or does that underlying content reside inside the institution or the UMLS or whatever?
Great question. It all starts with content. So the content is still king, right? The content is where we start, which is why I love that there are content marketers in here. So like you can learn about what else you want to map and talk to the machines about, but this is again just giving containers like context on the content. So it still all starts with content. And this is good news, right? So in, again, a world of AI where everyone's saying like clicks are blowing up, guess what? The enterprise, the health systems still need to own the content. The content's what's going to go into the machine. Good news.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so with the content itself, though, a lot of times we're looking at what the AI systems prefer. And so we start to look at those pieces of content and making sure they're on the pages themselves, FAQs, things like that. Videos are good too as well. All the traditional things that you guys are already doing, but we're looking at what the markup is and making sure those components are on the page, so we are building out that depthness.
At the back.
With the content that you mentioned there, what we're starting to see is the recency of content really having a large impact.
Correct, yeah. We're actually like on our site even just like updating things to make sure they like have, a new quote or they have like new images, just because like the business is changing and things are changing, that's making a difference. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a locational or regional qualifier in the schema so that would AI use that to come up with an answer based on where you're at?
Yeah, so is there a regional element to schema? So schema can help describe like a location. So like let's say it's a hospital or clinic and you describing where it is. We have seen sort of help it understand and then answer questions in the like local or near me context. Near me is also, locations are also a great entity linking example because sometimes, I don't know, we have a Paris, Ontario in Canada where I'm from, but it's like not Paris in Texas and it's not Paris in France. Like, so you can also be very explicit with regards to the name of the city, the place, or the neighborhood. And we've seen that move the needle on near me. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today. If you have questions, come back and have.